All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in. To those of you who are here, I will give the floor over to Stephanie. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, of course. I just want to make sure, do you see my screen? It says Violence Prevention 101.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here on a Friday for an hour and a half with me to talk about some really intense but necessary topics. My name is Stephanie Toledo. I am a health educator at Cal State Fullerton's Titan Well. So that's our health promotion department in the Student Wellness Center. I'm working off of a couple of screens. So if you see me looking over here, I'm still paying attention. I just have the chat over here so that way I can kind of see everybody. And when I'm asking questions or trying to be interactive, that's where I'll look. A little bit about this presentation and some background about me. So I do have a master's in public health. I've been in kind of the public health education, presentation, event realm since I was an undergrad. And I have about 10 years of experience when it comes to violence prevention. And we're going to go over a little bit about what that looks like and what that means. It's such a broad umbrella term. And during this presentation, really during any presentation, I like to share with my audience that this information to me is really well known and I know it like the back of my hand, and I'm here to present to you all. And so I say that because I'm a really interactive person. I'm really big on questions. I really like feedback. I really enjoy showing videos. So there are going to be quite a few videos because I feel like sometimes they can do a better job at explaining something than myself. And it can get a little boring just hearing my squeaky voice and just seeing me on the screen so that way the video is a lot better. So with that being said, I just want to share the goal of this presentation with you all. And I want to say that if you have anything to say, any questions or comments, the chat is wonderful. Because these are sensitive topics, if for whatever reason you don't want to respond or you have a question that you want to ask just me, feel free just to ask me. It might take me a second to kind of get there, but I will. So today's presentation goal is going to be to enhance the ability of you all to recognize and eradicate sexual misconduct. And again, we're going to talk about what that means with sexual misconduct, perpetration, and victimization risk, and to increase student awareness of consent, perpetrators, accountability, and campus and community resources. So there's a lot that I fit into this presentation. So I really hope that you all get a lot out of it. So I always start off my presentations with a trigger warning. So what does this mean and why do I do this? So trigger warning is going to be because we are going to be showing videos. I'm going to be bringing up scenarios, real life examples of cases of rape, stalking, domestic violence, consent. We're going to be talking a little bit about relationships and even sexual encounters. So if any of that might hit a trigger with you, either because you've been through something, you know somebody who's been through something, or it's just a really heavy topic to kind of take in, please make sure that you reach out. Like I said, I'm going to be providing resources at the end that are personal and that are relevant to Cal State Fullerton students. But this right here on the screen is always just really good knowledge to have, especially if you know folks who are going through these things that aren't Cal State Fullerton students, right? So this is the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the National Sexual Assault Hotline. They're 24/7 and they're national, so they can help out anybody with anything. And they'll even help folks out that are looking for resources or support or how they can help people that they know that are going through things. So it's a really great kind of slide for you to screenshot, or I know this is being recorded to kind of pause and jot down some notes on it, just in general. And like I said, I am going to be providing campus specific resources towards the end, but feel free to just shoot me a message private if you need some more support. Okay. So I keep talking about violence prevention, sexual misconduct, and perpetrators, and all these things, and trigger warnings. But really, what are we going to be getting into during this next hour and a half? Well, we're going to talk about why I'm here, why it's important that we are all talking and having these conversations, going over definitions, so that way we're all on the same playing field when it comes to what terminology means and what is it when folks are talking about something. we're going to really dive deep into consent. The reason why I specifically dive deep into this topic is because when we're looking at college campuses, this is something that folks really struggle to understand because it's really muddy water sometimes. It really should be black and white, but because a lot of folks aren't exposed to consent from an early age, we're not taught to have these conversations, it can be really hard to wrap your minds around really what it is, how to give it, how to get it. And I do just want to really clarify, it's not just university campuses or university students who have a hard time dealing with what consent is. The general public does too, especially older generations, right? These are new topics that they're being exposed to for the first time. But because you do attend a university campus, university campuses are held at a higher standard than our general community, which I think is a little sad. But there are policies in place, and you all are expected to conduct yourselves in a certain manner. And so if you're expected to do that, if there are certain kind of laws of the land, if you will, at the university, then we need to make sure that you really understand the ins and outs of what we're expecting. So that's why I focus so much on consent, and that's why it has this whole line on here. Next, we're going to get into dating or domestic violence. Really, right now, it's kind of been streamlined to call interpersonal violence. We'll be talking about that, stalking, and then lastly, how to help a friend. So it's going to be that support and other things that you can do to really help someone that that's going through these different topics. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. We're going to be talking about what is sexual violence. So sexual violence and violence prevention are really huge umbrella terms. This is really encompassing all these different subcategories and groups. So the easiest way to explain this is if we separate it into two different groups. The first group is going to be on sexual misconduct. The second group is on sexual harassment. So when we're talking about sexual misconduct, this really is talking about any sexual activity without the person's consent. That include. So specific acts are going to be sexual assault. So sexual assault, that can include sexual battery and or rape. Sexual battery, sexual assault, that could be if someone is trying to attempt an assault in a sexual nature, either with their own body parts towards somebody else, sometimes even using items. It could be something related to that. Rape is when there is intercourse that is happening. It could also be used with items, and all of this is without the person's consent. Another example of sexual misconduct is interpersonal violence. So again, interpersonal violence is kind of this mainstream term that everyone's using now. It goes back to domestic violence or abusive relationships, dating violence. So we'll be talking about what that looks like and kind of different signs to look out for. And then stalking. So that's also the last example of sexual misconduct. When we're talking about sexual harassment, it could be visual, verbal, or physical. So when we're talking about sexual harassment, this doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be any kind of physical touch. It can be, which is why physical is up here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be on genitalia. So let's say, for example, and I think back to movies a lot, I'm a big movie watcher and goer and lover. There are a lot of kind of 90s, early 2000 movies. I might be aging myself here. When we're talking about sexual harassment, it could be, for example, an employee and a boss having a conversation in the office, and the boss, a person of power, and we'll be talking about power a lot in this presentation and why that's so relevant to these terms and crimes and misconducts. But the boss in the situation, the person in power, can maybe perhaps start to be having inappropriate conversations. That would be verbal. And the physical would be an inappropriate touch on the shoulder, rubbing a thigh, kind of holding on to somebody from the hip area. So you see, these aren't kind of private parts, groin, genitalia, but it can be inappropriate. A boss should not be interacting on a physical level with somebody in that way. So that's kind of what physical looks like. I did say that, for example, it could be verbal as well. So kind of that conversation could be someone's talking about a sexual act that they perform with their partner, and you're an employee and you just happen to be in the vicinity, or even in a classroom, right? So like, let's say you're in the class and we come back after the pandemic and we start kind of re-assimilating, and you're just sitting there waiting for the class to start, and then you hear students talking about their sexual encounters and it's making you feel uncomfortable, right? The last line under sexual harassment you see is work academic environment. And so again, that's the environment, but someone is being verbal. And again, verbal could also be catcalling. So catcalling is really popular for especially men towards women, but it can be any gender or sex. All of these misconducts and harassment, no sexes, no genders, they're not biased or, discriminate against anything specific. But it could be catcalling, right? So like, hey, mommy, you look good, right? Like, can I get your number? Things like that when someone is just trying to go about their day. And then visual. So visual could look like somebody sending unwanted sexual images to you, showing it to you and you not wanting to see things like that. So that's kind of what visual would look like. Okay. So I've done a lot of talking already, but this is one of those moments for you all to kind of be interactive. So the next form of sexual harassment is quid pro quo. So quid pro quo is Latin, and I'm not a big Latin person, but I do know what this means. So I want to open it up to you all. So does anybody know what quid pro quo translates to? Oh, super fast. Yes. We have Samantha, this for that, right? And so y'all are so supportive of each other. I love it. Oh, yeah, Samantha. So you already know what we're talking about. That's wonderful. That you've had this training previously. And that's really forward thinking of your job to have that training, because a lot of places don't. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, this for that. So when we're talking about sexual harassment, and again, I'm thinking back to movies. So I'm thinking about, unfortunately, like classic examples of what that could look like. And so that could be an employee and the boss, right? The employee wants more hours at work, and the boss says, well, I'll give you more hours if you do a sexual favor for me, right? Or again, classic movie example, it could be a professor or a staff member at a campus, saying that to a student, right? You're looking for a better grade, or, doing these things. Why don't you come to office hours at my house, right? Students shouldn't be going to professors or staff's homes, or really going off campus unless it's a huge event that everyone's kind of attending. Again, it's all about that power play. I do want to specify, though, that those are just examples. I've worked on college campuses for about 7 years now, and I've seen this actually play out in clubs and fraternities and sororities. And it has nothing to do with a staff or a faculty member or a boss, if you will. There's that power play when we're talking about organizations, we're talking about clubs, right? And so if there are people in positions of power, such as presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, and they can have some sort of kind of oversight in one of the aspects and they can advance you, that is seen as power as well. So I just want to be clear about that it's not necessarily official employee positions with students. It could be student to student in certain scenarios. And then we already kind of talked about the work and academic environment. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page when it comes to big terminology, what we're really going to be diving into today, the different categories, what they look like, I really like to emphasize why I'm here, why you all have invited me into this space, which I'm really grateful for. It's always really exciting to see when students are the ones that are initiating these conversations. But why am I here? A lot of times when I give these presentations, it tends to be mandatory presentations that fraternities or athletes or certain groups need to have to meet certain requirements. And so they're not always on board. Some of them are, which is really great, but they're not always on board to kind of receive this information. And even just general students who aren't involved in very much, sometimes they don't understand why we're having these conversations, why you all are required to do the online training that tends to be really long. And then there's the refresher course every year. Well, this is why. So the reason why we're here, the reason why I even have a job, is because when we're talking about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, any type of sexual violence, the the facts are there, the reality is there, that unfortunately this really impacts everyone everywhere. When I share that statement with folks, sometimes they'll sit there, they'll think quietly to themselves, and they'll be like, not really. Like, I don't know anyone who's gone through this. I haven't gone through this. I don't know anyone who perpetrates these crimes. So does it really affect everyone everywhere? But the truth of the matter is that it does. So statistics are there and research is there, and it shows that the fact is that we all know victims. The other truth is that we all know perpetrators who commit these crimes. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into what I mean by that. The fact that we all know victims. There may be victims that you know, but you're unaware that they're a victim. There are a variety of reasons why someone who might be your best friend, a family member, someone who you're really close with, wouldn't decide to tell you that they are a victim. And so, again, this is going to be another opportunity. What are some of those reasons why you think that folks that are victims might not come forth to share that information with you? And guesses are great too. There's really no wrong answer. It's all about learning. So, what would be some reasons why someone who's a victim that you're really close to would decide not to disclose to you or to disclose to others?
I'll throw in a guess. I think because it's such a personal issue, something that really hits really hard emotionally and personally. It's not something that they might not have maybe every chance to talk about it, just to bring it up because it's such a hard topic, and it's also probably really hard for them to relive that traumatic experience.
Yes, spot on, right? It's not something that you can just talk over pizza, right? Or in the middle of class. And it is really heavy. And like you said, every time a victim talks about it, they're reliving that trauma, right? No matter how many years ago it was or how recent it was. Thank you for sharing that. I have in the chat shock. Yeah, sometimes people who have gone through these acts, through these crimes, they don't really even understand or even accept what has happened to them, right? There is a lot of confusion about what happened and how they're taking it in, even about what they want to do next with it. It's so hard to talk about. Many aren't believed. Yes, thank you. Everyone's kind of hitting these points that I wanted to really bring up. Um, a lot of times, victims don't share because they are scared that if they share, they're going to be victim blamed, right? They're going to be asked questions like, well, what were you doing alone with that person? Were you drinking? Why were you drinking that much with someone that you knew or that you didn't know, right? What were you wearing? Were you leading them on? And people are just inquisitive in general, but these are not appropriate questions to be asking a victim who's gone through things, because then you make them feel like what happened to them was their fault, and that somehow they asked for that to happen to them, right? So they may be scared because they're not going to be believed. But a second reason why they feel like they might not be believed goes back to the truth that I have on the screen. The truth is that we all know perpetrators, right? So unfortunately, if you look at the bottom of the screen, 80% of these crimes are committed by an acquaintance, somebody that the victim knew, whether that's a family member, a really close family friend, another student, a colleague, an employee. It tends to be somebody that people know. So if you happen to know the same person that perpetrated against them and attacked them and violated them, but you know that person with this facade that they put on with for everyone else, which is like really nice, right? Perpetrators are huge manipulators. A lot of times when the victim comes forth and tells, let's say, a family member, it's really hard for someone to see their own family member as this criminal, as this person who would violate someone's rights like that and someone's body. And so then it kind of twists things around for the person that they're disclosing to, right? So that's what I wanted to share. So we all know victims, whether or not we know them. And so this is something to really keep in mind. And I'll go over why at the end of this slide. Let's focus on the truth. The truth is that we all know perpetrators because the statistics are there. Only 20% of these crimes are stranger danger, even though most of our lives since we were little, we were told don't trust strangers, right? Which is true. I'm not saying that we should be, less vigilant about strangers. I'm just saying the statistics show that these crimes aren't perpetrated as much by strangers. I want to ask you all, why do you think that 80% of these crimes are committed by someone that people know versus only 20% by strangers? What is one factor that someone you know might have an advantage to versus someone that you don't know? Access, trust. Yes, 100%. I love it. Usually I'm waiting for responses and y'all are on it. This is such a great group. Yeah, that's the number one thing, right? If someone random out of the blue, you're on the street, comes up to you and says, hey, you want to go back to my place? There are those percentage of people who could be down, right? Which is totally great. No judgment there. But a lot of people aren't going to do that. They're going to be like, I don't know you. I'm not going anywhere with you, right? And even now, when we're talking about hooking up and dating and all these dating websites, people take all these precautions when they're going out with folks that they don't know for the first time, right? I know people who share their location with people. I know people who do all sorts of stuff. But when they're going out with a friend that they've known for 5-10 years, they don't think twice about those precautions. When they're going out with a family member or they're at work, they don't think about these things, right? And so we need to keep in mind that we all know perpetrators. We don't choose to know them. We wouldn't want to be friends with someone who tells you that they've committed these crimes, but unfortunately we do, because it tends to happen by people that we know. A couple of last statistics that I want to share that you'll see on the screen is that 44% of women and 23% of men will be victims of sexual violence. So this isn't by chance. It's a statistic that they will be victims of sexual violence, and they are. What I want to share is that y'all maybe have been hearing me say terms like y'all and folks and things like that. I'm not from the South, and the reason why I use these terminologies is because I try to be as inclusive as possible. So I try to stay away from you guys or you gals or things like that, especially because I don't even know who's on the other side of the screen. But with that, I want to share, and again, I've already repeated this before, but all these crimes are inclusive as well. So when you see statistics of women and men, does this happen to transgender folks or folks who don't identify as either or? 100%, right? The statistics are coming in because they're a much smaller percentage of folks that are coming forth. So when we're talking about victims and perpetrators, a lot of times especially when I talk about rape or I talk about domestic violence, interpersonal violence, we automatically, without even thinking, because we've been socialized by movies and media and family and society, sometimes we automatically picture a woman, a female, as the victim. And sometimes we automatically picture perpetrators as men. But that's not always the case. I've worked with victims where the woman raped a man, right? I've worked with victims where it's men to men, female to female. Why am I sharing this? Because at the center of all sexual violence, the reason why perpetrators commit these crimes is power and control. That is the center. I've worked with a lot of folks who tell me, oh, well, it's sexual pleasure or sexual gratification, or they found someone really attractive. No. When perpetrators are asked why they chose this person, why they committed these crimes, it comes back down to it: power and control. I have heard of perpetrators who were men and, they raped a man and they did not identify as gay or bi or anything like that. They identified it as straight, attracted to women sexually, but it was about power and control. So I just want to make that really clear that when we're talking about these acts, it has nothing to do with sexual gratification and pleasure. It has all to do with power and control and how the perpetrator really manipulates their way to getting that from the victim. I have in the chat that these are such high numbers. And I'm really glad that you expressed that and that, you have this reaction, because these are actually inaccurate statistics, if you will, right? because you have to think about it. These statistics are a couple of years old. And even when that happened, not everybody will identify what happened to them as one of these acts because maybe they weren't raised that way. And not only that, you're looking at these statistics for women and men. And I even shared that folks from LGBTQIA community, we're seeing lower rates because they're underreported. The number for men here on the screen is well underreported. And there's a big reason why. Do you all want to share some guesses as to why you would think that the number for men coming forth as victims would be lower than it actually is compared to those of women? Awesome, Maribel. Yes, so we have shame, definitely one of those reasons. Stigma, yes. Sunshine, Jerry, toxic masculinity, yes. Awesome. What I really like too is that I'm seeing different names pop up. Usually it's the same folks, which I appreciate, but I love different folks. And y'all kind of save yourself a little because when I can see everyone on the screen and just the names, I know most of you don't have images or video on, and I see the same people, I'll like be like, okay, I'm gonna pick on people now. So y'all have saved yourself from that, but this is fabulous. Okay. So when we're talking about why men underreport, that's exactly why. Because society has told men that they're supposed to be strong and they're supposed to be able to defend themselves and that they really shouldn't have any harm happen to them. But this is all just social stigma and being socialized to think that way. We're moving away from that now a lot more compared to way back when. I say way back when, but even 5-10 years ago. And so when a man goes through these acts, regardless of how they identify, and they've been violated, sometimes it's really hard for them to come forth because they don't want to be judged. I have worked with a victim where he had been raped by a female, and the next day he went and told his roommates what had happened, and his roommates were men, and the men were like, bro, like, you didn't get raped, you got some, right? They totally just invalidated his experience and what he went through. Yeah, it's really incredibly sad. And it's really harmful when we're talking about victims. We've had victims where it was men who were raped by other men, and they didn't want to come forth because they thought that that made them gay or it made them something that they weren't because they didn't understand why they had been selected out by the perpetrator. Yeah, I hope so too. This was a few years ago, so I'm not sure. I haven't heard. Unfortunately, in this line of work, when you work with victims and survivors, you don't always get to see or keep in touch through because of confidentiality and kind of privilege and stuff like that. All right. Now that we're good with terminology, we're on the same page with that. We understand why this is important and why, even though you may not know somebody or you don't know anyone who's gone through this yourself or somebody else or have heard about things, why it's really important to still have these conversations. I had shared earlier that it's really, really important that we all keep in mind that we know perpetrators and victims because we need to watch how we talk in our everyday language. We don't know who is a victim or a perpetrator. So if you're out there encouraging or yourself even making jokes about these crimes or downplaying them, you don't know who's listening. You don't know if your friend or your family member is perpetrating these crimes or have been victims to these crimes. So if they're a perpetrator and they hear you make a joke about this or downplay it, then what does that signal to them? What do you think that signals to a perpetrator? If they hear you make a joke about this or just downplay all of these kinds of crimes, what does that signal to them? That it's okay. Yeah, right? It normalizes it. It's not like they're looking for validation, but when they hear things like that, then they subconsciously realize, oh, okay, like, yeah, that is what I did wasn't bad at all, right? What happens if a victim hears you downplaying this or making jokes about this? How would they feel? So if someone you don't know who's a victim overhears you say something, it invalidates what happened to them. And if they haven't come forth to get help, the chances of them coming forth are now extremely lowered, right? So that's why it's important to kind of keep people in check. I know when I first started in this line of work, I did that a lot with my friends, especially because when I first started, a lot of these statements were common. So, like Facebook stalking, Instagram stalking, we think that that's not a big deal. But for someone who's been stalked, to hear stalking thrown around so like frivolously, like, oh, I'm stalking this person. I ended up on their grandma's mother's cousin's page and I know everything about them. It can really downplay stalking for someone. And stalking can be really serious and really life altering and scary, right? And so when I first started, I would tell my friends like, hey, that's not funny. Like it really harms people when you talk like, oh, Stephanie, stop. You're not on the clock. You're not working right now. And I would tell them it's not about being on the clock or not working. I said like, this happens even when I'm off the clock, right? And by you doing that, I was like, you don't know who's a victim. You don't know who's perpetrating these things. So keeping each other accountable, right? I'm not saying start fights or things like that, but just tell folks like, hey, that really made me feel uncomfortable, right? Like maybe you want to stop saying that. Have some things in the chat. It invalidates their trauma. Yep, you folks are thinking the same. Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to go ahead and show a really quick video on consent. It's about 3 minutes, so I might have to cut it off, but it just has really great information. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into consent. So give me 1 second because I have to unplug my headphones so you all can hear it. And I'm really sorry because I know that when folks play videos via Zoom, sometimes it lags and then the words don't catch up with the video, but I'll explain it all after. Can you hear that? Just a thumbs up.
We should talk.
I want to talk about it.
We need to talk about consent.
Okay.
Which may seem hard. It's not really everybody's favorite subject. I feel like I used a lot. Like we're getting something new.
It's a little hard to hear, but the subtitles help.
But we should be talking about it. Because this and initial 3 times here is the wrong way to think about it. Consent is more than just a legal term. It's not a box to check or something to get out of the way. It's about respect and listening. It's communicating, open, and it's how to have good sex. I'd like to talk about that. Really good sex. I vote we talk about that. And we will. But first, let's get some things clear. Consent means you have ownership over your own body. You have agency all the time. And nothing can ever change that. Not what you wear, not what you've been drinking, not where you are, or what time it is. Nothing. Consent is something you own and share. And you always have the right to choose what you share. Just because you give consent to one thing doesn't mean that somebody has full reign of your body. And you can always change your mind. If you don't like what's happening anymore, it's perfectly fine to stop. Peace out. Gotta go. You don't owe anyone anything. And it's okay to say no to some things and yes to others. Communicating ensures that everybody is safe and feels respected. It's also the key to great sex. Because sex should be good. And good sex is great. Like really, really great. You feel good about it the next day. Clouds opening up. And the day after that. You're completely in tune with the other person. I'll do that again. I'll do it again right now. So how do we do that? How do you know you have consent? You gotta pay attention. Sometimes it's verbal. Yes. No. Those are pretty clear cut. Sometimes it's physical. You're really vibing with someone. Returning loving touches. Guiding each other. Reciprocating. Communicate with your partner. Or partners. Right. Communicate with them about what you like or don't like. How are you feeling? How are they feeling? Do they seem conflicted, uncomfortable, or tense, or even scared? Check in. And if you're not sure, ask. Is this okay? Can I do this? If not, they'll be glad you asked. Because that's kind of sexy, actually. Help your partner by being clear about your consent. Wow, I don't want that. Why don't we try something else? Let's stop. You don't have to feel shy or worried about what they'll think. No one wants to have that sex.
Okay, awesome. Looks like I'm connected. All right, so when we're talking about consent and we're talking about all of these crimes, and I show videos like that, sometimes I get students, folks, just people in general who tell me like, like really, do we have to talk about sex and like pleasure and how to give consent and get consent? And we do, right? So definitely in no way, shape, or form am I encouraging folks to engage in any acts of sexual intercourse that they don't want to, or have kind of feel uncomfortable. But when we're talking about crimes that involve, penetration and sexual nature, we have to have those conversations. The reason why I really appreciate that video is because, like I said, I've been doing these presentations for quite some time. And whenever we talk about consent, yes, it's great. Like, here's a definition, you know what consent is. But when I ask students, how do you give consent? How do you get consent? How do you ask for it? How do you, do that? It's really uncomfortable conversations. Folks don't want to share. They don't want to tell me. They don't know, right? And so for me, it's like, it's great that you know the definition inside out of consent, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't know how to give or get consent, right? Because that's really the act that we want to make sure that you all understand. So let's talk about this a little bit. When we're talking about consent, there are key things. Consent has to be voluntary, so it can't be coerced or manipulated in any shape, way, or form. That's point number 2. Sorry, I'm so into it. Point number 2, it given without coercion, force, stress, or intimidation. Oh, in the chat, I saw subtitles. I love subtitles. I watch subtitles all the time when I'm watching movies and everything, just because. So I try. So if the other ones don't, I'll try to have the subtitles back on. The third point when we're talking about consent is that it can be withdrawn or revoked at any time. And the video did highlight that. I'm going to take a moment to pause here because sometimes people have a really hard concept of wrapping their mind around this. So when I'm working with students specifically, they'll ask me, right? Well, Stephanie, I was at a party and I happened to see this guy and this gal at the party in front of everybody. They were drinking, having a good time. And they were all over each other, clearly very consensual. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, fabulous. And they tell me, well, then they led each other up to the designated room. And, what happens in the designated room. And the next day, one of them comes out and says that they were sexually assaulted. And they're like, that doesn't make sense. I saw them all over each other at the party. Everyone saw them all over each other. Clearly they willingly went into that room. So doesn't that just mean they regretted it and they're just claiming that they were sexually assaulted? And I've gotten a question like that a lot in various presentations. And so, like the video mentioned, consent can be withdrawn at any time. In that scenario, the two people may have been totally okay with groping and making out, touching each other over the clothes, whatever, right? And maybe at that point, they both wanted to go into the bedroom. Yeah, right? Let's go. Just because somebody says yes to going to the bedroom, in no way is that indicating that they're willing to have, anything past what was going on in that moment before, right? Going to a bedroom does not mean oh, that's it, we're going to engage in sexual intercourse and just do everything under the sun. No, it doesn't. It literally just means that you're willing to go into the bedroom. So what I'm always saying is that, well, when they were in the bedroom, maybe one person wasn't down to do X, Y, and Z, and the other person might have coerced them or manipulated them or told them oh, come on, you were out there with me and you wanted this. I know you want it. And then they forced themselves on them. I said, or maybe they're in the middle of a sexual act in the bedroom and one person, wants to try something and they say, no, I'm not down for that. And then the person still goes forward and does it. You can say no at any time. And you can say yes to something, maybe you're trying to try something new and you don't like it. And you feel oh, you know what? Can you stop? I don't like that. Let's try something else. The fourth thing when we're talking about consent is that it cannot be given by someone who is incapacitated. And this is really important. I have a whole other slide about incapacitation versus intoxication. And then lastly, it has to be affirmative. So this doesn't say it has to be a yes. It doesn't have to be a verbal yes. It says it has to be affirmative. And this is because it needs to be inclusive. So there are folks who can't verbalize, right? There are folks who physically cannot speak, and so they could not say yes. And so if we say that it has to be a verbal yes or it has to be a yes, then you're saying that folks who can't talk can't give consent and they can't engage in sexual activity. And that's not right? That's not accurate. So it has to be inclusive. And the other thing is that just like the video showcase, which is why I really appreciate that video, It doesn't always have to be a yes or verbal. If you're in the middle of something, right? Pushing your partner closer to you, or saying like, keep going, right? Or I like that. Or just, giving specific noises that show pleasure. There are different ways to give consent. And how do you ask and you get it? Do you like that? Keep going, right? Are you into this? Are you not? Do you want me to stop? Are you okay? Constantly checking in throughout the act or acts with the person or people that are involved. Whenever I say that, a lot of times people will be like, that's really uncomfortable. Like, it kills the mood, it kills the vibe. And I tell them, if you are not willing or you are not comfortable having a check-in throughout the process with someone that you are, butt naked with, and they're butt naked with you, then maybe you're not ready to have the act that you're about to have. I said, sexual intercourse of any nature or of any, measure is a really personal thing. Someone's being really vulnerable with you. I said, if you're not ready just to check in with someone or even ask them if they have an STI beforehand, which is another thing that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, then you really shouldn't be engaging in sexual intercourse with that person at all, right? You owe it to them and you owe it to yourself. Okay, any questions about consent? And it's totally okay if you do. No judgment if there are certain things or on the screen or examples that I gave that you're like, Stephanie, I don't get it. Like, how is that consent? Or how do I give consent? Like, things like that. Yes, you owe it to them and you owe it to yourself, 100%. Okay, I don't see anything, and I don't see anything in the Q&A either, right? Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and move forward, but we're not done just yet with consent. There are some other things we have to consider. So whose responsibility is it? So I get a lot of times where people think that it's the victim, if you will, or the survivor in the case, that they should have been like, well, no, I don't want that. Just stop. And that because they never said that, then that means that they gave consent, right? So it was their responsibility. Why might a person, right, not vocalize or verbalize like, no, stop that, I don't like that? Why might someone not say that? Given all of the, there's, oh, you're on it. I look over here, you're already there. They're scared, right? Maybe they're being coerced or manipulated, and they're afraid. They're afraid that if they say no, something is going to happen, right? So just like you all saw, that doesn't make sense either. We can't expect people to say no. When we're talking about whose responsibility it is, it's both parties, right? It's one person to ask like, hey, are you okay with this? And then the other person, should say, no, I'm not, or yes, I am. And here's the key. If that person doesn't respond or they just look unsure, that doesn't mean, oh, well, okay, I'm just going to try it anyways, right? And see what they think. That means stop and pause and be like, hey, I just asked you if you'd be down to do this and you're not really responding. Like, are you okay? Do you feel uncomfortable? What's going on? Because there's been a lot of cases just in general where they'll be like, well, I asked and they didn't say no and they didn't say yes, so I just went for it. It doesn't work that way. You constantly have to check in. So like the slide says, it's the responsibility of each person or persons involved in a sexual activity to ensure that they have affirmative consent of the other participants to engage in the sexual activity. And important, the last sentence, lack of protest or resistance does not mean affirmative consent, and neither does silence. So these are really important. When is there no consent? So when we're talking about consent and when we're talking about the definition and when there is no consent, because you attend a university, there's a very specific definition and outline and law of the land. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to folks who don't attend a university. So this isn't law when it comes to state or federal or cities, which I think is really unfortunate because I feel like this would really benefit a lot of folks out in judicial court when they're prosecuting their perpetrators. But specific to you all, because you are students and you do attend a university, there are specific times that no matter what, there is no consent. When a person is incapacitated, it means that they lack physical and or mental ability to make decisions, informed, rational judgments and decisions, right? So what does this mean? How can someone be incapacitated? So someone could be incapacitated if, someone is hit over the head and they're unconscious and someone decides that they're going to take advantage. But there are also other means for someone to be incapacitated. Incapacitation doesn't just mean someone's just like passed out, like just down on the floor. Incapacitation can also happen when folks are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And this is where it gets really tricky, especially on college campuses, because there are higher rates of alcohol and drug usage than in the general public. So let's talk about this for a little bit. Incapacitation, again, means that, like my image here with my chihuahua, that the person is just out, or, and again, going back to the other slide, they cannot make informed, rational judgments and decisions, right? So it doesn't mean that they had to be conked out. What does that look like? Well, if I decide that I'm going to have, 5 beers, right? And I know you can't see me in person, but I'm 5 foot tall, right? Like I'm just I'm little, short height. And I'm a female, right? And that plays a lot of things to do with body fat and all these, do a whole other presentation of alcohol. But that really impacts how drunk, how fast I get, right? So if I have 5 beers and I'm stumbling, I'm slurring my speech, you're asking me if I'm hungry, and I'm like, I don't know, right? You're asking me what I want on my pizza, and I say, I don't know, right? I can't tell you where I live, right? I'm dropping my keys. Like clearly I'm drunk, right? I'm just done. But I'm not blacked out. I'm not knocked out on the ground asleep. Then I am still incapacitated because I cannot give rational, informed judgments or decisions. Is that clear when we're talking about incapacitation, how there's different ways for someone to be incapacitated? Okay, awesome. I'm seeing yes, 5 foot gay. Yes, we're out there. Okay, awesome. So what I want to talk about now is, and this is okay, I get a lot of people who ask me this question at this point. Fun sized, I love that. Is, okay, Stephanie, well, what's the limit then? What if I want to engage in drinking? What if I want to engage in drug usage, right? What's the limit? When do I stop if I know I want to be sexually active, or if I'm trying to be sexually active with someone and I see them engaging in that? Well, are they intoxicated? Intoxicated is different. If I have 1 beer, technically I'm intoxicated. If I have 1 puff of marijuana, or if I have a line of Coke, or I do a pill of Xanax, or I do something, right? Then maybe I can give an informed, judgment decision and it's all there, but maybe not. What does that mean? It's muddy waters. And it's because when we're talking about alcohol consumption, when we're talking about drug use, everybody's body is different. So I had a best friend she was my same height. And she was tiny. I'm 29. She's the same age as me. She's tiny. She weighed 98 pounds. She was 5 foot high. When she had 1 beer, she was done. She could not give informed decisions. Her judgment was not there. But if I have 1 beer, I'm fine. I can tell you what I want. So it's unique to each person. So someone can be intoxicated, right? Someone could have 5 beers and still tell you, yes, I consent. I want to do this, right? I know I want to do this, and I'm totally fine. But you don't know. You're not going to know. So what I say is that if you are really interested in this person and you really want to be sexually active with them, and you've consumed something or they've consumed something, and you don't want to, well, you want to play it safe, don't engage in anything sexual. I always say that that person will appreciate you that much more if you don't engage in anything sexual. If you just take care of them, right? Their friends are gonna be like, oh my God, they take care of you, like they care about you, right? And you're not in any gray or muddy waters. So really you're protecting yourself and you're protecting them. Just wait until you're both sober. It's a gray area, right? But people who are intoxicated can give consent. It's just a matter of when can they not, and it's unique to everybody. Okay. The other time there is no consent, no matter what, is if one person is over the age of 18 and the other person is under the age of 18. Now, attending a university, there are folks from all walks of life and all ages, right? And especially for a lot of first-year students, they have, romances from high school still. And that's great and awesome. But because you attend a university, even if you are romantically involved, like, this is my partner, this is my boyfriend, this is my girlfriend, this is who I'm with, we were sexually active before we both turned 18, you cannot engage in sexual activity with that person. When I say this, a lot of times people will tell me like, well, how do people know? How will they know? And they don't, right? This is only really a case, or it really becomes into effect if the person decides to kind of follow and press charges or go to Title IX and open an investigation. And Title IX, who's a department on campus who does investigations for students, with crimes, realizes and does research and sees that one person is over the age of 18 and one is under, automatic no consent. And then the last time that there's no consent is mental disability. And this I have to be quite specific on. When we're talking about mental disabilities and not allowing or not able to give consent, we're not talking about, depression or anxiety. We're talking about mental disabilities where the person truly, because of their mental disability, they do not understand what is happening. So they mentally cannot give consent because they don't understand what that means. And unfortunately, there are those people out there who will target and take advantage of people like this because they know that they won't say no, or that they won't comprehend what's happening to them. Are there any questions as to the 3 times that there is no consent, or this concept of how this only applies to university students and not the bigger population, or anything with consent? No. Okay. I think we're doing great. We're just going right through it. Okay, let's move on. Okay. This one is I'm just gonna say it's a really fun topic for me to talk about, the relationship spectrum and relationships. The reason why I say it's a really fun topic for me is because I feel like this is where I get the most people with light bulbs going off, really being like, oh, I didn't know this, and I didn't know that that's what that meant, or this is what this looked like. So any relationship, not just romantic, right? Platonic friendships, sometimes even parental relationships, they all fall on a spectrum. Everything. That spectrum is healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. So again, making sure that we're all on the same page. Healthy. What does a healthy relationship look like? I'm going to ask you that. Think about it for a second. Don't type it in the chat yet. I see some of you already. I can feel some of you. But I just want to give this blanket example real quick. A healthy relationship is where people make decisions together. They openly discuss whatever they're dealing with. They enjoy spending time together and apart. What are some of these adjectives that folks would use to describe a healthy relationship? What are some of those things that you need to have for it to be a healthy relationship? Go ahead and type away. Yes, you have to be comfortable with the person. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be honest. Yes, communication is key. Oh yeah, we're big on communication, and I love it because it's true. My next question about healthy relationships. Oh, no worries. Do people in a healthy relationship fight? Do they argue? Yes, 100%. They can. Do people in a healthy relationship get jealous? Does jealousy happen? Yeah, for sure. Why do I bring this up? When I go over what it really means to be in a healthy and unhealthy abusive relationship, I get a lot of folks who come up to me, and before they really understand the difference between all these, and again, these are very fine lines to cross in between each. They'll tell me, "Oh my gosh, I have a friend, they're in an abusive relationship." And I'm like, "Oh, like, thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that you're looking for resources and support." And then they just jump right into it. Yeah, they're always arguing all the time, right? And when I ask them to tell me a little bit more about what it looks like, it really doesn't go past the arguments. And I don't mean to laugh, but um, they don't understand that arguments happen and we're human and there's disagreements, right? Now, there's a difference between arguments, and then there's a difference between people using emotional, intellectual, mental, manipulative tools during arguments to hurt the other person. There's a big difference. We have in here, it's unrealistic to think that friends don't argue because life isn't perfect and tough times arise. To not argue sometimes is to only life on the surface. Yeah, 100%. Live life on this. Yeah, everyone argues, right? Everyone's jealous all the time. It happens. It's really the extent that other person uses that against the other person. Awesome. Really, really appreciating the chat. So let's talk about an unhealthy relationship then. Because a lot of times when we're talking about relationships, folks just think it's healthy or abusive, but it's not. So an unhealthy relationship is where one person is trying to make most of the decisions. That person may pressure their partner into things that their partner doesn't feel comfortable saying yes to, but they feel like maybe they're starting, like if they don't, something might happen. And you feel like you should only spend time with your partner. And I didn't bring this up in the healthy one, but you should be able to hang out with your partner, and then you should be able to spend time away from your partner and each have friends, and have those social support groups, right? Only spending time with your partner, that can really actually negatively start to affect your relationship, because we can't always be with one person all the time, right? We need other resources and other support. So when we're talking about an unhealthy relationship, this could start to look like someone who starts telling you like, "Oh, why are you always going out with that person?" Or who are you texting? Like, why are you always on your phone? Who's calling you, right? Really, you should spend the night with me tonight. No, like you should just say no to your friends. Like you should just, be with me. They may, for example, a really big one I see especially a lot in college population is going to be sexting, right? So we have one partner who is really trying really hard to pressure their other partner into sending sexual images, receiving sexual images, and they're just not into it. And they may start to feel pressure, right? So there's a key term that partners who are really pressuring their partner may start to use to get something out of them. Does anybody know what they'll say? No. If you love me, you would do that, right? Oh, come on. If you love me, right? Don't you trust me? To really start to kind of coerce and manipulate. When we're talking about, yes, yes. When we're talking about unhealthy relationships, yes, there are arguments, but these arguments are so much more frequent than in a healthy relationship. And in a healthy relationship, when the arguments happen, at the end, then folks try to make sure to understand each other and come up with a compromise. In an unhealthy relationship, those compromises are slim to none. There's a lot of arguments happening and they don't really go anywhere. When we're talking about an abusive relationship, one person has complete power and control over the other person. They are making all of the decisions. You are spending all of your time together, and it's not because you're choosing to, it's because they're telling you. They make you feel like you can't talk about your relationship with others because you know that what's going on isn't right. So this is a person who will snatch your phone, who will tell you, "You're going to give me your password because I'm going to be able to access all your stuff whenever I want. You're going to share your location with me, not because of safety reasons or because you're willing to, but because I'm telling you to. That person, you're not going to go out with them because, and this is the real kicker, they'll say things like, they're not good for you, right? I don't trust them. I don't think you're safe when you're with that person. So you're just not going to go out with that person. You're going to stop talking to them in general. Let me see. We have the way arguments are conducted are also important. It can be healthy, constructive arguments. Yes. And that's what I was trying to get at, right? All of these different spectrums of relationships, they have jealousy, right? In a healthy relationship, I can be jealous, but I tell my partner, hey, I got jealous when this happened. And then we talk about it, right? And really, if anyone's jealous, it comes down to kind of insecurities of themselves. And I can recognize that in a healthy relationship, right? Like, yeah, it's just because that person has beautiful eyes and I just can't. No matter what I do, I can't do that, So yeah, I got insecure. And their partner just reassures them, right? Like, I'm not going anywhere. I didn't think anything of it. It's fine. In an unhealthy relationship, it can be kind of, well, why are you doing that? All right. I'm jealous. And it's not really going anywhere. And you can't understand why the jealousy is happening. And then in an abusive relationship, it's like jealousy is not even there. They try to manipulate it else, some way other than that, but it is. And that jealousy turns into no, like you're not going out with that person anymore because I don't like it. Right. And that's just it. So they all have the same characteristics. It's about the way and the extent that the abuser is using that characteristic to have power and control over the other person. When I share this spectrum, a lot of times people start doing their retrospective, like they're thinking introspective. They start judging themselves and be like, oh my God, I've done that and I've done this. And, I didn't do good with that argument. And maybe I did do something or, I did this. This isn't for you to be like, dang, like I'm an abuser. Like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know that. This is really more so that you recognize, like I said, there's fine lines in between everything. And if you found yourself engaging in some sort of behavior, if you look in and you're trying to really develop yourself and really work on yourself throughout the years, throughout your relationships, that's what it takes. I'm here giving this presentation. Am I saying that like all of my relationships have always been on the healthy spectrum and that's how I'm able to give this presentation? No, right? I'm human. It hasn't. There are some behaviors that I've engaged in the past that I'm not proud of, but I educated myself, I learned, I realized, and now I'm in a really great, healthy relationship, right? And like folks were saying, this isn't just romantic. This plays with parents, this plays with siblings. Gosh, sibling relationships, right? So complex. Yes, it can be with coworkers. It can be with friends. A lot of times people forget that that's a relationship. And I have worked with a lot of folks that are in pretty unhealthy and abusive friendships, right? Because again, it's not about love and it's not about sexual attraction. These acts are centered in power and control, right? Okay. Any questions, comments? A lot of times at this point, I'll get like, well, is this behavior? Where does this fall under? What is that? Go ahead and type if you have anything. What I will share is a really big one that I get a lot as well, is access to phones and access to computers. And well, if they have nothing to hide, why won't they just show me, right? Why? Or we should be able to have each other's passwords. Let me tell you, whoever you're with, right? Can they ask you, can I see your phone? Like, who are you texting? Sure. 100%. Can they tell you, I don't trust that person, I feel like you're not safe around them? Sure, right? Because it's a question, they can ask it, it's an opinion, they can give it. But at the end of the day, you are your own person. It is up to you and your decision if you want to give them your phone or if you want to stop hanging out with that person. And if you say no, I'm not going to give you my phone, you shouldn't be victim blamed, right? You shouldn't be like, well, that means they're hiding something if they're not giving. No, it's not, right? You have a right to your own privacy, no matter who you're with. And if your partner can't respect that, or they're like, oh, well, something's going on, let me tell you something. That's not somebody you want to be with. There is somebody out there who will respect your boundaries and your privacy. And maybe one day you'll just freely give someone your phone and your password, right? I give the example that me and my partner, I gave him my password. We live together, we're here, we're doing it. I'm like, hey, babe, can you check this on my phone? I'm cooking. Can you unlock? I mean, it's fine, right? But I trust him enough to know that he's not going to go snoop through my face. There's a difference, right? And I hope that that's clear. Children's privacy. Yes, that's a whole other conversation. Friends as well. There's been scenarios I've heard of where like, oh, we're besties, so like we need to have each other's fingerprint or scan face. And no, you don't. Let's see. You can't take everyone in your journey, not feeling guilt, even if you have know them for years. Yes. Oh, fingerprints. Yes, some people. Yeah, right. And that's really important when we're talking about relationships that aren't, or even if they are romantic. Some people are meant to be in your life for a certain moment and you learn, right? And then they move on. And if they can't respect you and your boundaries, that's kind of what that really is. Any questions or any other comments about this one? See, this is why I said I really enjoy talking about this. I feel like this really hits home with a lot of folks because we all experience relationships. Oh no. Thank you for feeling comfortable for sharing that. That really is unfortunate. I can't imagine. Oh, they know her? Oh, they're naming her. Oh my gosh. That's insane. I will share that because we're talking about family members, Life 360, anyone familiar with that? Where parents can literally track you, like it can tell them like if you're in a car how fast the car's moving. Like, I mean, it's unreal. So I share that because technology is a wonderful, beautiful thing. Like here I am in the pandemic, able to Zoom with you folks. You all are in the safety of your home, right? I have this beautiful background, so you don't see my roommates and everyone in the background. But it can also be really scary, right? A lot of times abusers and stalkers will virtually download malware onto phones where you can't even tell that they can literally see what you're seeing on your screen on their phone. So just being mindful of that. Let me see. As someone who's aromantic, asexual, I really appreciate covering non-romantic advice. It often gets overlooked and it's incredibly helpful. Oh, Keely, I really appreciate that. Like I said, I'm all about inclusivity. And when we're talking about these topics, right, not just about men, female sexual encounters or not, relationships, right? It's not always about those that are romantic or sexual in nature. So definitely. Scary, no way. Oh yeah, when we're talking, and we'll get into that when we're talking about stalking in a few minutes. But there was a case in Canada where and by the way, my mentality is if we don't get through everything because we're on tangents and having conversations, I would rather much have that. So I feel like that's how y'all learn this information a lot better, and you remember things versus slides and me just naming things off. But yeah, there was in the news in Canada, I think it was maybe a year or two ago, where with all these smart homes happening, there was an abuser who actually hacked into his ex's smart home. And they were messing with the lights. They were messing with like the Alexa. They were playing music really loud at really odd times, like nighttime, but not letting them rest. They just wreaked havoc on their life. So it can definitely happen. Oh, Ghost. Some of you all are on that movie journey with me. Yes, Ghost is really good. But yeah, and there wasn't a ghost, right? It was very, very scary. I'm laughing, but it was very intense, very real, very scary. But yeah, so just another perspective on that. Yeah, it's terrible. I'm going to go ahead and skip this. I feel like this just depicts a relationship and kind of how things escalate in the relationship It's a really great video, but I think we've already had such a really productive conversation about relationships and given so many different examples. I'm just going to go ahead and skip over it. If you folks are really intrigued by it, it's called Love Labyrinth. As you can tell, I'll just put it on in YouTube and it'll come up. Okay. When we're talking about relationships and we're talking about interpersonal violence, you'll see on the screen that there are many different ways it could be called. Domestic violence, dating violence, relationship violence. Interpersonal violence is a new mainstream term for it because, just as folks have said in the chat, it's not always romantic. So when we're talking about domestic violence, a lot of times people think home, but abusive relationships aren't always in a home, right? Folks can be in an abusive long distance relationships. And then when we're talking about dating violence, then we're not being inclusive to all the other types of violence in relationships. Same with relationship violence. So we're trying to kind of go towards interpersonal violence between multiple people. I had shared with you all that in the center of all of these crimes, there's power and control. Well, I kept describing certain characteristics of perpetrators. I kept saying, they're manipulative, they can lie, they know how to keep up, this facade, all of these different things. Well, when we're talking about interpersonal violence, these abusers really know how to wreak havoc and really work their partner. And they use a lot of different tactics. So on the screen, that's what you're seeing. Because when we're talking about abusive relationships, interpersonal violence, a lot of times the number one thing people think of is just the physical. But nowadays, especially with appearances in social media and pictures, abusers have been really smart and they know that they can't leave marks. Or unfortunately, sometimes they'll learn how to physically assault somebody just enough so that it doesn't leave marks. But that's not the only way. When we're talking about these relationships, they can use blame and coercion. So in a lot of situations, you'll get somebody saying, well, if you just hadn't done that, then I wouldn't be reacting the way I did, right? But someone's reaction is their own. And maybe you did something that they didn't appreciate, but that doesn't mean that they get to do that and blame it on you, right? It's about that communication that we're talking about. Coercion, we saw that in the example that I was saying about if you love me, you do this, right? Economic abuse is really big, especially when we're talking about folks that do live together. So when we're talking about economic abuse in relationships, a lot of times you're going to get somebody who, I'm thinking about a married couple right now, where in a situation, one of the partners won't let the other partner work. They've actually told them that they're not worthy of a paycheck. And there's been other couples where they're like, oh, you can work, but you give me the paycheck and I give you an allowance. And so a lot of times people don't stop to think about this. A more relatable example would be I worked with a couple in college once that they lived together and to save money, college students, and they owned one car and they shared that to go back and forth from school. And it was a commute. They got into a really heated argument. It was really abusive, and the abuser took off and intentionally told the other person, like, I know you have a midterm today, so good luck trying to get to school. And they just took off in the car, right? That's malintent. That's manipulation. That's using financial means, a car, first. Like, it can really go to some extent. Threats. We'll see a lot in relationships, like, I will kill myself if you don't do this, right? And again, this isn't just in romantic relationships. I've seen this in friendships, right? Where it gets to that point where I will self-harm or I will go and do this dangerous act if you don't go and do this with me, right? I will hurt others if you don't stay with me or if you don't do this. Isolation. So I kept bringing up that example where, one person might say, like, I don't want you going out with this person anymore. And over time, your friends and family members will start to isolate you. If you're inviting a friend out all the time, and every time you invite them out, they say no, at some point, Your friend group's gonna be like, oh, are you gonna invite Stephanie? And you're gonna be like, no, I invite her all the time, but she's always saying no. She doesn't want to come out, so I'm just not gonna do it anymore. And they start isolating you. Why do they want to do that? Because then they really have you in a situation where you're not going to go and get support or help from anybody else. They know what they're doing, right? And it all starts with that initial statement. I don't like that person. I don't want you going out with them anymore. And then it really escalates. Jealousy, I gave that example. Emotional abuse. So I've been talking a little bit. So back to the chat. What are some examples? And it can get a little heavy and gritty right now. But what are some examples of what emotional abuse might look like, or what it might sound like? You're being dramatic, right? It wasn't that bad. Minimizing your feelings. You shouldn't be getting mad over that. Or why are you feeling that way? You're way too sensitive. Gaslighting. Yes. This all has to be doing with it, right? Gaslighting. I give the example of food, and this is definitely not the same extent as gaslighting in an abusive relationship. But my food example is that, like, we could be here and I could be eating something, and tomorrow you see me and you're like, oh, Steph, like, I saw you eating that apple during the presentation. Was it good? And I'm like, what apple? I wasn't eating an apple. And I'm like, definitive, like, you saw something that wasn't there, right? And people will do that over and over again. And it kind of sounds like incredible. Like, how can someone believe someone when they saw it? But if it was just you two and they keep telling you like it didn't happen that way, right? Then you really start to believe it. And it starts with really small things. You're taking their side versus a perspective looking. Yeah, right. Emotional abuse can also look like put downs, like you're horrible, right? You've gotten so big, or you've gotten so skinny, or why are you so sloppy? We have minimize, deny, and blame. So they minimize what happens. And again, this goes to gaslighting or feelings. They deny it, like, I didn't do that. And then they blame me for it, right? Monitoring. So I already gave some examples of what that could look like. Physical assault, we talked about. Sexual assault. When we're talking, excuse me, I'm so sorry. When we're talking about sexual assault, this also can pertain a lot to any kind of relationship. We saw how anybody can really sexually assault, harass, or rape anybody else, and it tends to be an acquaintance. But a lot of times when we look at married couples, and especially cultural and religious reasons, depending on those cultural and religion reasons, they might actually try to go get assistance from their communities. And when they go and they say, like, my partner is, sexually assaulting or raping me, they'll be met with things like, well, it's your duty, right? Like, you're in that relationship, you need to make sure that you're satisfying your partner, even when you're not into it. And that's just not true. People can say no, and we've talked about that. Privilege. So if somebody has a higher degree than someone else, if they make more money than someone else, if they're a certain race or ethnicity versus someone else, using that against them. And then using children. Unfortunately, folks that have children together, there have been a lot of cases where the abuser will threaten the children, hurt the children, tell their partner that if they don't do something, then they will. And unfortunately, sometimes it does lead to children dying by the abuser. So I'm going to go ahead and skip forward a little bit. I have 6 minutes with you. And so I'm just going to go ahead and share with you the cycle of violence. So a lot of times people don't understand how someone can choose to be with an abuser. Somebody never chooses that. It's a cycle, right? And they don't realize that they're getting caught right in the middle of it. So the honeymoon phase, everything's great. They're Netflix and chilling. They are falling for each other. They get together, and that can last as long as it does. A lot of times it's years before the abuser will start to really abuse the person. It can maybe tend to go unhealthy, but that's kind of where it's at. And then the tension building phase hits, where at some point in the relationship, now you feel like you're doing something wrong when you didn't before and you don't know why. A lot of people will relate this to walking on eggshells. And then the violence hits. I have a question mark here, and I have violence because, again, it can be any of these. And again, abusers are smart. They'll start with little emotional, manipulative, coercive things and then move up. But the one act will happen and you'll start to question why you're with this person. But before you can really make any decision, they'll come back and lavish you with gifts. They tell you, like, I really love you. Or, I really enjoy being with you, or this friendship, or whatever it is. Here's a gift, right? If I didn't feel bad for what I did and I didn't care about you, then I wouldn't be here. So then you start questioning, your whole relationship. And if you're really willing to give up that relationship of 4 or 5, 10 years over this one thing. But the problem is that now that person has you. So it keeps going in a circle where maybe this was happening every couple of months and now it's happening every couple of days, every week, to every couple of days, to daily, over and over again. Why do people stay in relationships? Again, they're caught up in the middle of it. They're afraid. We talked about finances, mental state. If you're with someone or you're in a relationship with someone, you have a friendship, even parental, I've seen these play out in parental relationships, sibling relationships. This will all start to have a mental impact on you. You will start developing anxiety, depression. Your self-worth will go down. You will believe all of these emotional statements that they're saying to hurt you and harm you, and you start believing that you deserve it. Right? You start to believe all of these hurtful, hateful things. So it's really hard for you to kind of get out of that mental state and really look for help. Children, I gave that example. And then I gave some examples about culture and religion. Okay. Sorry, I have 3 minutes. And I just wanted to get through stalking and then some resources. So when we're talking about stalking can look like anything that's on the screen. But really, it's a repeated course of conduct directed at a specific person that causes fear for their safety. So a lot of times we think of this scary person like on the screen that jumps out of the bush, but that's not true. A lot of times stalking develops from an ex, whether that be an ex-friend. I've seen those cases, sometimes an ex-employee, or an ex when we're talking about a partner. And so when we're talking about stalking, it's not just following. I've interacted with folks where they got unwanted gifts appearing at their doorstep or at their car every time they parked at a different place, and the person knew where they were. I've heard of stories where people who are being stalked have to stop talking to their friends and family because their stalker has threatened them, or they're afraid that if they see them hanging out with them, that they're going to harm them. There's been cases where people have had to reroute the way they get home, they get to work, they've had to drop out of school. Extreme cases, they have to change states and relocate. It can be a really scary thing. So these are just some kind of things to consider. And stalking can also look like vandalism, them harming pets, unfortunately, is a really big thing. They break in and they harm pets. They can slander you on social media now. They can spread kind of photos if they have any of you. So there's a lot of different things to kind of consider. So how can you help someone if you know that they're going through these things? Intervene, say something, approach the situation. Are you okay? Always intervene if you feel like you're not putting yourself at harm, but believe them. Don't judge them. Don't question them. And most importantly, ask them what they want. Do you want to report? Do you want to go get counseling? Do you just need resources? Do you want to go to a shelter? What do you want, right? Because you're there for them. And provide resources. So when we're talking about resources, I'm going to go over here. Oh yeah, using a deep fake, just 100%, again, technology. When we're talking about resources, you have Title IX, who does reporting, investigations, and supportive measures on campus. So they can help you if you decide not to press charges, because that's local, but if you want something done on the university level, like if you don't want them stalking you, you have to change classrooms. They can make them change dorms. If you've been raped or sexually assaulted, and because of that you had trauma, you can complete assignments. You have to talk to them, tell them what happened to you, and they'll make accommodations. And if you decide to really kind of want this person who caused you harm to be like get rid of, they make an investigation. They really research both sides, so it's as fair as possible. And they then go with repercussions. There's also an advocate on campus. There's her information. Let's say you don't want to report to the police. You don't want to do an investigation. You're not looking for supportive measures. You just want help. they can help you. Or if you do go to the police, they can go to the court hearings with you and do things like that. And then lastly, there are community resources for folks that might not be going to campus. So this is Waymakers and Laura's House. Again, those are their websites and their telephone numbers. So I'm really sorry I kind of rushed through the end. We were having such great conversations and I really appreciated that. But I want to be respectful of your time and you all being here. So I know it's 7:30, but if anyone has any questions, any comments, any thoughts, you hated this, you wish I would have covered something else, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can always email me. I don't mind at all. So thank you so much for having me. I don't know if there's any last minute thoughts or anything anybody wants to share. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Oh, thank you. Thank you for participating. We have, what about sexual assault involving getting pregnant? How do we help our loved ones? Can firehouses also help if they go there? Yes. So when we're talking about sexual assault or any kind of rape, getting pregnant or actually even getting an STI or HIV or AIDS is a really realistic reality. So the first thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're connecting them with local community resources. Waymakers, Laura's House, like I had up on the screen, they are really there for victims and survivors, and they will help them choose what they want to do. I've worked with victims and survivors who have chosen to keep the child. It's a personal decision. We've worked with victims and survivors who have decided that they don't want it to keep the child, right? Whether they want to terminate or they want to see it through and then give it up for adoption. It's all about them and their decision. So really asking that person what they would like to do, and I would go to a local resource and find an advocate. Advocates, like I said, are there to support them and their decisions and really stand for them. That's a really wonderful question. This was so helpful, so in depth, so much information. Of course, no, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Well, that's all I have. Like I said, there's other presentations or other folks that I work with, someone who's all about alcohol, tobacco, other drugs. We have a nutritionist on our team. There are other presentations on bystander intervention. We didn't really get to that, but if you see something, how can you successfully intervene without getting hurt yourself? So there's all other things. Again, thank you so much for having me and for being so interactive. I can't appreciate that enough because it really makes these more productive, in my opinion. So is there anything that you want to say or anything before I go?
I just want to just repeat what everyone else is saying, that we're all so super grateful for you just sharing all this information. It's a huge help, and just really great to be aware and prepared for whatever may happen in life. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and then if you wouldn't mind just passing along my email to everybody in case anybody wants to have further conversations, you're looking for specific resources, there was something you didn't understand. I don't mind Zooming with you. I don't mind exchanging those emails with you, connecting you to resources, or just having more conversations. I would really appreciate that. So thank you so much. And everybody have a wonderful evening and a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thanks.
Bye.